We're often faced with characterizing risk to help us understand and manage a risk portfolio. Often, folks approach risk as one muddled heap of hazards and opportunities, sort of like a big tangled ball of yarn. But if we're to make headway in managing our risk, we need to establish some organization. This will allow us to tease out the different threads and expose meaningful patterns. There are different kinds of risk, and depending on the type, we may have different appetites, priorities, and treatment options. Having a clear picture of the mix of risks in a portfolio is the foundation for good risk management. So how do we classify risk? We use a simple risk classification system to parse risks into unique buckets that lend themselves to management and treatment options. We may ask, is the risk pure or speculative? Is it subjective or objective? Finally, is it diversifiable or non-diversifiable? This approach creates a hierarchy that helps us group risks into distinct categories. First, let's consider pure and speculative risk. Pure risk has only negative outcomes. Examples include hazard risk, which includes property losses, liability losses, and impacts on people, and operational risk, which covers adverse effects on processes, systems, and organizational controls. Pure risk analysis only focuses on the negative impacts, which is why it's the main focus of our climate assessment work. We're looking at potential negative and previously unseen climate events that could affect our operations and daily lives. It's tough to imagine positive outcomes in this kind of analysis, but they do happen, and we shouldn't ignore them if they do. Speculative risk includes both positive and negative outcomes. Examples include financial risk, which covers investment risk and behavior markets, and strategic risk, which contemplates the advantages and disadvantages of our decisions. In strategic risk, we consider how our decisions can affect us, normally in non-financial ways, though it often overlaps with financial considerations. Speculative risk contemplates opportunities that we may pursue because of their possible positive outcomes, but still carry plausible downside risk. We encounter this almost daily when deciding to buy a lottery ticket, invest in a bond, bet on our favorite team, or start a new business. We are attracted to these risks because of the potential benefits, but they all have chances of loss that we can sometimes overlook. Now let's consider the difference between objective and subjective risk. Objective risk is based on measured variation in uncertainty. We base our understanding of the risk on data that can be verified and replicated through measurements and statistics. Subjective risk, on the other hand, is based on perceived amount of risk, based on opinion. It draws on judgment, training, skills, and experience. Often these risk options are cast in opposition to each other. But our experience shows that the best understanding of risk comes from a blend of both. In fact, objective risk should be validated and judged. Is the data good enough to inform our decisions? Meanwhile, subjective risk analysis can often be validated through measurements. We can use subjective risk analysis as a starting point. Normally, we only measure things we know we need to measure. So, objective risk analysis dominates in areas where we have previously identified a need. On the other hand, subjective risk analysis helps us pinpoint where the weaknesses are and areas that we need to start measuring. Now let's consider how risk can be diversifiable or non-diversifiable. Diversifiable risk is risk that affects only a few organizations or people, while non-diversifiable risk affects a wider range of organizations or people. When risk is diversifiable, it may be possible to transfer risk to those who are not directly affected. We may be able to contractually transfer some risk to another party, for example, like buying insurance. Non-diversifiable risk, on the other hand, affects a wide range of organizations and people. As the risk is widespread, it's difficult to transfer it. Everyone's in the same boat. There is no place to effectively transfer the risk. In this situation, risk transfer is like moving deck chairs on the Titanic. Why is this important? Let me share a few observations. When we are identifying, assessing, or treating risk, we need to understand the specific nature and context of that risk. What about this situation makes it more or less risky? Can we specifically measure the things that make it risky? Or is the risk based on our professional judgment of the situation? Does the risk only have negative effects? Or can we imagine situations where it might result in benefits? Can we avoid the risk or transfer it to other people who may be willing or better equipped to handle it? These questions percolate through our risk work. The answers have a bearing on how we classify and manage the risk. For example, we may be willing to accept some downside risk in order to pursue an opportunity. Or we may opt for risk treatment options where we can find willing partners to share the risk. The type and nature of a risk can influence ranking in an assessment. The willingness to accept risk, our risk appetite, can lower our assessment of its priority within a risk profile. Often, participants in a risk assessment or treatment program will have a fixed view about that risk. Operations staff may see risk as always being negative because they have more experience in dealing with hazard risk. On the other hand, financial advisors may see risk in a more positive light, balancing potential losses against anticipated gains. Both views are fine. The key is to be open to the idea that there are different kinds of risk that may require different management techniques. We can use the concept of risk quadrants to provide context between these different types of risk. Often, I'll return to this idea to help brainstorm my analysis of risk and risk treatment options. It stimulates the right sort of questions to ask to clarify the type of risk we're considering, identify features of that risk that may contribute to it or diminish its effects, and open doors to efficient risk treatment options. First, we consider pure and speculative risk. Pure risk appearing above the center line and speculative below. Pure risks include hazard risk, which contemplates threats to property, personal injury, and liability. The other pure risk is operational risk, which considers threats to people, processes, and systems. Since these are pure risks, when we contemplate their risk management, we focus on preventing or mitigating loss. We do not consider potential positive outcomes. Speculative risk encompasses things that may have both positive and negative outcomes. Consider financial risk, where investors pursue profit while managing exposure to losses from market forces or other liabilities. Think of the considerations that we go into when we're buying RRSPs at tax time. The other speculative risk category is strategic risk, which contemplates economic and social issues, demographics, and competitiveness. Trends in these areas can affect our organization, often in ways that are not financially quantifiable. For example, it's good for an organization to have a good reputation. It smooths permit applications, development of new facilities subject to broader social license, and things like that. Meanwhile, a poor reputation makes all of these things much more difficult. While these may have some financial implications, the link is hard to demonstrate on a balance sheet. The quadrants of risk offer context. They give us a lens through which we can formalize our analysis. The risks in each category present different ranges and types of consequence. The categories are also linked to different treatment options. The approach cuts through much of the possible confusion and lends itself to effective risk assessment and treatment processes. Once again, I've focused on academic distinctions, categories, definitions, and things like that. As we assess and treat risk, understanding its context and structure goes a long way to identifying effective management action. It opens the door to reveal new or unforeseen approaches that can pave the way to success in our climate risk assessment work.